Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for our last Career Pathway series. This week is about careers in public service. And we are delighted to have 4 panelists with us today, all who have careers in the federal government. And they all have very, very different paths. So I think you'll have a really good time hearing from them. So kind of how we're going to go do things today is we're going to start off with having our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll move into Q&A, and then we will end with a little bit of a discussion. But, you know, I think when we look at the kind of what is going on with everything in the world today, whether we're talking about COVID or race relations or the economic crisis, you know, government is present and public service is present in each one of those crises. And these are all folks who do incredible work, but often don't get the praise. You know, they're not like Elon Musk or whomever out there, you know, getting all the Twitter followers and everything. They do this work on behalf of the American people, often with little thanks. So I wanted to thank you all ahead of time for your service to our country, and thank you for the work you do, and, you know, really illustrating for our students through your lives what it means to be a person for and with others. So we look forward to learning from you, and yeah, so we'll get started. So I'm just going in order of who I see on screen, but Heather, if you wanted to get us started.
I knew it. I knew I was going to go first. I knew it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Macleod, and I am currently a commercial officer with the Foreign Commercial Service. And the Foreign Commercial Service falls under the U.S. Department of Commerce. And our charge is to help U.S. small and medium-sized businesses either start exporting overseas, or if they are already exporting overseas, find new markets. It's one of the lesser known of the agencies that have a foreign service component, the others being State Department, of course. There's also U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and then also U.S. Department of Agriculture with their Foreign Agriculture Service. So between Commerce and the 3 other agencies I mentioned, there is a foreign service component to that agency. My career path, just quickly, I started out coming out of MSFS in 2010, and I went directly into the DHS, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Policy Fellows Program.
Hey, Heather. Sorry to interrupt. You were breaking up there for a moment. So if you could, if you wouldn't mind, you cut off at about, you started at the DHS.
Yes.
Fellowship.
So I started at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in their Policy Fellows Program. Then I moved over to we'll get more into the nitty gritty.
It happened again. I'm sorry.
Oh no, of course, right? The last thing I said was DHS to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and then from Customs and Border Protection headed over to Commerce. So I hope that helps, and I'll just leave it at that for further discussion later. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so Doug, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and introducing yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, I guess, depending where you are in light of these strange days. My name is Doug Britt. I'm a graduate of the college, and happy to be with you today. I currently am across the street, so to speak. These days I'm calling from home, but I am across the street from Heather at the Ronald Reagan Building, which hosts the United States Agency for International Development. The headquarters, I should say. USAID is globally positioned around the world, has roughly 80 missions that are either country-specific or regionally focused. USAID is a frankly, a grant organization that provides funds to promote economic prosperity and peace, to support both sovereign countries' national interests and our own national security interests, economic and actual security, hard security. We are a agency of the State Department. We report to the State Department. We get funded from them. We have a budget of about $22 billion, and I work in USAID's Global Development Lab, which is a technology and innovation focused bureau within USAID. So while I'm not regionally focused, my regional focus is the world, where we serve on behalf of the U.S. taxpayers who fund us. So I'll stop there. And I had a whole career before USAID in the private sector. Worked at Microsoft, worked at Accenture, and started my career right out of Georgetown as a teacher right in Northeast Washington, D.C.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. So now if we wanted to go to Ambassador Hosa.
Thank you, and hello to everyone, and thank you for tuning into this. I'm a graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, but back before electricity, I graduated in 1979. Those were pretty dramatic years in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and all I wanted to do was a career in the Foreign Service. Eventually that came true. I joined the Foreign Service in 1985 and have since subsequently gone through 11 overseas assignments. And I've had a great pleasure of working with people in wonderful organizations like the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Foreign Commercial Service. In fact, that's probably been one of the most fun aspects of being in the State Department itself, is the ability to work with such a wide range of other U.S. government agencies. Try to build a whole of government approach to problem solving in our foreign relations. The career has gone on for 32 years, and I'm happy to tell you more about it as we go through the rest of today's session.
Wonderful. All right, and last, Miss Shanika Whitehurst from EPA.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you guys for joining to, hear about us and hear what we do. As Elizabeth just mentioned, I do work for the Environmental Protection Agency. So I've been with the EPA for the past 12 years. I'm a graduate of Georgetown's graduate school. I did undergrad at a different university. At the EPA, I'm actually would be neighbors to both Heather and also Doug, since we all seem to be in that federal triangle complex area. But really next door neighbors to Doug for sure, since Ronald Reagan building, I can look at it from my office. But right now, currently I'm the acting division director for the Program Implementation and Coordination Division in the Office of Children's Health Protection at EPA. And as you know, just like the Department of Commerce or USAID, are very highly structured organizations with different offices. We have offices that do a bit of everything. So I can say when I return back to my regular job, I'm the Environmental Justice Coordinator for the Office of Air and Radiation within the EPA as well. I guess what else are we saying? Like Doug mentioned previously, I had a career before I joined the EPA in private industry, and then I came over and I've been in public service for the past 12 years.
Wonderful. So I was curious if you each could maybe reflect a little bit on, thinking back to when you were in Georgetown, and did you ever expect to be in the position where you are today? And, kind of explain a little bit about that path. What were some of the key decisions that you had to make, and how did you make those decisions as you moved forward and as you started your career especially?
Is it free for all? Will you want to go in order? What do you want to do?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'll start since I went off mute first. With me in between now, I guess I can say post undergrad. So in my undergrad at the University of Delaware, I was an environmental science major. Like a lot of you getting ready to leave Georgetown with an undergraduate degree, trying to figure out what to do next. And I'm like, I'll date myself, it's fine. When I graduated in 2000, the outlook and the horizon, especially for environmental science, was a lot different than it is now and today. I could say also the outlook for science policy as it stands now versus 20 years ago looked a lot different. So for me, I had to fall back on, I had a minor in biology and a minor in chemistry. So I had to fall back on those skills that I'd obtained throughout my courses, and I worked in labs. So biotech, as I know some of you all know, in the early 2000s, biotech really took off, and there were plenty of biotech labs to work in and just get to different skill sets and those pieces. And actually, that's what brought me to Georgetown, was working in the DNA bone marrow donor program that Georgetown was sponsoring with the Department of the Army. So did a lot of DNA extraction, a lot of analysis, all of those good things from a bioanalytical standpoint. And while I was working there, I had the opportunity to continue my education, and they had just started a science policy program. Now it would be called the Biomedical Science Policy Program, that's hosted by the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. And going through that, the whole point was to bring people with scientific minds or casts and see how you can take that knowledge and apply it from a policy setting standpoint and writing standpoint, really, because is that that transition from very highly scientific speak down to the policy level, to where it would be in a bill, to where you're writing up a policy for EPA that would be disseminated to the public or to the states. That's where all of that stuff came into play. So for me, coming out of Georgetown, I wanted to have industry experience. Prior, I knew EPA or one of the regulatory agencies were definitely someplace I wanted to be eventually. But I'm a firm believer of understanding the industries and such that you're going to regulate, how they do their projects, how they fund their projects, all of those pieces that go into it. So I worked for a consulting firm for about 4 years or so, and it was biopharmaceutical, chemicals, petrochemicals, refining, mining, everything underneath the sun that you could think of that EPA regulates now. But what that allowed me to do was make a firm foundation to then catapult into EPA. I joined it on what is now defunct, but it was a federal career intern program. And that was more for mid professionals, not so much brand new to the field, but going into it. So I'm gonna say I had a winding curves to where I am now. There's not a straight path. Some people have a straight path. I just did not have a straight path. And it just goes about you as you have each opportunity is honing your interests and allowing for your interests to change, because they are going to change. You guys are still, young yet. You may get into it. I remember, going into like, I'm going to do exactly what my major did. And I just did not like that job at all. And that's okay. Giving yourself that allowance. So I'll turn it over.
Any other reflections on your path?
Yeah, Beth, I very much appreciate her points about being flexible. And I often look back on how I staggered into the U.S. Foreign Service as great wisdom coming from many big mistakes. Those were very turbulent times in America, as we have now. Back then, we were having political assassination, demonstrations, unpopular war, international terrorism started in 1973 with the Munich incident. Hijackings began, gas lines started, and government service was not looked on with any great interest by the majority of my generation coming out of the Vietnam War. Nevertheless, I knew all I wanted to be was a State Department Foreign Service officer. And so out of high school, I applied to, I think, 2 universities, University of South Carolina, where I live, and Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, because I assumed Georgetown University School of Foreign Service was the gateway into the Foreign Service. Mistake number 1. I did not pass the written exam my senior year at Georgetown. And I had rent to pay, and I lucked into a job as a copy aide at the Washington Post. And I was on the newsroom floor, and back in those days, news came across on teletype machines, and I was the teletype operator. I would replace the paper and the ribbons and distribute all the stories that came off of UPI, AP, Agence France Presse, Reuters, to the various desks on the newsroom floor, which was interesting enough. But there was my second mistake. At that point, I could have worked with an editor and become a freelance writer for the Washington Post. Just generated stories to see if they would publish them, pay me for them. There was a red hot war going on in Central America, in El Salvador, and there was plenty of news to be covered for an enterprising young budding foreign correspondent. I did not take that path either. Some of my friends on the newsroom floor, they got all excited about some newfangled thing called cable news network down in Atlanta that was just getting started and people were kind of laughing about. Well, I didn't go with them either. And so I kind of missed out on the whole CNN television news thing that mushroomed into a large thing. Fortunately, after a year of clipping news wires, I passed the written exam. But that was only the beginning. It then took a couple more years before I was invited for the oral exam and went through the background investigation and through the medical clearances. And that only because there was the terrorist bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, 1983, and Secretary of State Schultz was empowered to rebuild the State Department. And so I think they scraped down to the bottom of the register, found my name, and invited me to join an A100 class. And so, I mean, I really do agree with what my colleague was saying, that you need to be open to opportunities and different paths. On the other hand, I got lucky. I just kind of pig-headed and stuck it out and ended up in the Foreign Service.
Thanks. Thank you. Doug or Heather, any thoughts or reflections or additions?
I think for me, it's if I were to think back on advice to give to students coming out of school, it's you have to look at your job search from a lot of different angles. And when I was coming out of school, my goal was to get into the Foreign Service as well. And I failed the oral assessment, and I was devastated because I was like, oh, this is what I wanted to do, but I was blocked. And so, you know, I ended up getting in a fellowship program, getting into as a fellows with the Department of Homeland Security. And I was with the Office of Policy for 5 years. And I would say that even though I did not do international affairs work, the foundation that I got from that being there in their Office of Policy, where it's at headquarters and you see all the different components within Homeland Security. At that time, it was still a new agency. I got to see a lot, and I got to see a lot of how strategy is made at the headquarters level. And so you take what you can from where you are and what you have, and then you just start to build. And then after that, after doing some networking and figuring out, how can I start to do international affairs work, a lot of the agencies outside of USAID and State Department, they have offices of international affairs. And so Customs and Border Protection, which is where I went to next, still under the Department of Homeland Security, they had an Office of International Affairs, and the whole goal was that if we help to build up the border security agencies of other countries, then that's less work for us to do here. So it's playing more of the offensive game than defensive game. And so I would encourage you to look at, if you're gung-ho about international affairs, to look at other options besides State Department to kind of fuel that desire, because while you're waiting on the Foreign Service test, while you're waiting on the written portion of the test, and while you're waiting on the oral assessment, you can be getting your footing in other agencies. And then that's what actually happened to me, where after 5 years of being with Customs and Border Protection, I finally got a call from the U.S. Commercial Service after I applied in 2011, by the way, that I was finally off of their rank order registry list, which is the same thing as what Ambassador was saying, that there's a list after you pass an assessment. There's a list that you go on, and it may take some time before you get off of that list. So I would encourage you to think of your international affairs career from a lot of different angles. There are NGOs, there are philanthropic organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Obama Foundation. There are organizations like the National Democratic Institute or the International Republic Institute that also do international affairs work. But if you can do those things while you're waiting on the process to play out for the Foreign Service or other opportunities in the federal government. The federal government is a slow process. It's not as quick as the private sector, but it does happen. It does play out. But I would say to definitely look at other things in the meantime to kind of get that experience that you're looking for while you're waiting on a federal career to start.
And Doug, I know that you come from a different background as well, and I know part of the work you're doing is to try and help get government into the digital age and being a little more, I'll say, quick with the technology. But thoughts on your path to get where you are?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Again, I do work in the innovation hub of USAID, and to kind of tie it into, but a slightly different angle than what my fellow colleagues have said, is that if you had asked me what USAID was when I graduated, by the way, with a government major, I probably wouldn't have, maybe I would have heard of USAID, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate what they did. Maybe I would have said they like, help in humanitarian crises, but which is true, but they do far more than that. The truth is no, I'd never imagined myself in this current role, and certainly not in the innovation capacity that I currently am. However, something that really neat that happened a couple years ago when even though I work in positions at USAID, I work across the federal government. I work with foreign commercial services. When I was in Asia, in the fall, just months before the COVID outbreak there, I met with the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service Officers, state foreign commercial service officers. I report to the National Security Council at the White House. I work with the National Economic Council. You have to understand how government works. It is a bureaucratic monster, and what I do remember from my Georgetown days that has helped greatly in this role that I never foresaw was that oftentimes I'd have to write in the blue books. I don't even know if you all use blue books anymore, but when we had to take our final exams, we had paper blue books at Georgetown, and we had to, answer these questions. And I remember taking courses in international affairs and comparative politics and American government and all the, electives that followed that. And I remember, frankly, being a bit overwhelmed when I answered them. I wasn't by no means was I a scholar, I would say. I did my best, certainly, and it was good enough, but it was a struggle. It really challenged me. And what I'd say is as I now am in, 20 years later, and I'm in this federal position, where I have to literally look at multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations, understand local economies, understand gender issues. I mean, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of variables you have to factor in, filter, and frankly, present and convey in a short amount of time. That's what my Georgetown undergraduate experience did. And I'm going to be honest with you, for the first 15, 16 years of my career, I didn't feel like I was leaning on that, but it was latent. It was within me. It was something that I had within me. And when the calling came, 20 years later, mind you, it came out. And as a result, I've been able to, all modesty aside, convey it effectively and do good things that I think are in the interests of bettering the world. To that, I owe that to my Georgetown education, without ever knowing how I was actually going to be, bringing it to the world.
Okay, thank you. So now, students, if you want to go ahead and ask a question, feel free to submit it in the chat function, and then we will go ahead and read your questions aloud. But I wanted to start with one, and that's one that I hear a bit. I think some of you are more recent to government, and others, like Ambassador Jose, you've been here for a while. You've seen a lot of administrations. You've had different bosses. How much is your day-to-day job really, does it really change from administration to administration? Like when you're thinking about, like, I know some of you are now higher in positions, but like for your average entry-level student, like does it really matter who's in the administration at any given time? Or like, what is that like when you are going down one path and then somebody gets elected president and you have to kind of shift gears?
Beth, if I could just start real quickly.
Yes, please.
The impact is in inverse proportion. If you're starting out early in your career, you're feeling the macro effects of a new administration, okay? For example, the Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq, major policy decision, and for many new Foreign Service officers, that impacted their careers because they ended up doing unaccompanied tours in Baghdad to staff what became the world's largest embassy. Now, in inverse proportion, at the top levels, there were officers in the Foreign Service who were adamantly opposed to the invasion of Iraq and resigned, or retired. So administrations make a difference. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Secretary Shultz was empowered to build the State Department. We had, of course, Secretary Powell also empowered to build up the State Department, which meant hiring increased. And so they were reaching further down the register to attract Foreign Service officers. Also, too, regardless of administration, over 50% of the staffing at any American embassy abroad is from other government agencies, not the State Department. What my colleagues were saying earlier about, having international affairs divisions in many U.S. government agencies, absolutely true. And over 50% of the staffing at that embassy are made up of folks from other government agencies besides the State Department. So if you have an administration that values the State Department, the embassy structure, and the State Department is given a voice in Washington within the NSC and in the foreign affairs community in Washington, D.C., then you will feel it in terms of your career, your assignments, moving up. But then as you get higher up and you get more involved in actual policy decisions, then, as they say, there's no such thing as a general who's not political. And there's no such thing as a senior Foreign Service officer who is not political in some way or other. You are attached to your policies. Now, with that said, we all salute and execute, but an administration like the current administration has basically waged war on the State Department and done a lot to dismantle it. And under Secretary Tillerson, for the first year or so of this administration, 1/3 of the Foreign Service disappeared. And now, only now, are we starting to talk about, under Secretary Pompeo and whatever will happen in this election, we are now having people talk about rebuilding. And this is, so the immediate impact right now is that this is a wonderful time to join the State Department, because it is going to rebuild. It will be in a rebuilding phase. And so hiring will be up, and the opportunities for younger officers to take on greater responsibility will be real.
Thank you. Any other reflections?
I would say, hopefully you can hear me, but I would say that that for me, when I was at Customs and Border Protection, that was very, we were definitely under the Trump administration, and you would see that for CBP, I was specifically working on the Mexico desk. So you would see that, policy, at the working level, the difference between the working level and then the difference between us working with our counterparts in Mexico, and then the difference between like the higher level, overarching level, working with their counterparts in Mexico. So whereas we had a very cordial, very amicable, and very cohesive relationship, and we were working smartly together on a lot of things. I think to the outside, it may have seemed that between U.S. and Mexico there was friction. Especially a couple of years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, there was friction. But at the working level, we were still able to get things signed, to get documents signed, to have memorandums of understanding, to have agreements done, and that's at the working level. So I just wanted to point out that even though there was a lot of things going on, between President Trump and Mexico's president, that at the working level, that we had a good relationship. And then the other thing I would say is that, tweets do matter. And there were some times where we would just finish working on something, and then the next day it would be a different policy that was a complete about face to what we were just working on, and having to kind of be very diplomatic and very tactful in how you talk with your counterparts about what just happened. There were some dicey moments, I'm not gonna lie, but I would say that at the working level, it's a different relationship from what you hear in the press, and from the president to president, prime minister to president level, that you hear about in the news.
Shanika or Doug? Any thoughts?
I've only worked under the current administration, so I don't really have a, perspective to share.
Thank you.
So with me, I started at the end of Bush 2, so George W. Bush, and was in for that transition in Obama. So that was a little bit different of the time. So to see it go from a Republican administration to a Democratic one, you do see different activities start and stop, and all of those pieces that go into it. So this transition into Obama now to Trump has been the first, well, I guess a second administration switch. And it's been a bit more unlike any other switch, even from even in between going from Bush to Obama, was a little bit calmer. It didn't seem as complicated as the other ones. So I can say that. But also, when you talk to colleagues that have been here at EPA a lot longer than I've been, you know, you may look up to them even as a newer employee, or one at this point I've been with the agency for like almost 8-9 years. And you're so like, is this normal? Just to get a pulse on what does this thing look like, because it was unlike the first one I went through. And so so that one I can say was just this current one was just a lot of flurry of activity, but also a flurry of looking at pieces where it was more complicated, like decisions weren't being made, things were more on pause. You were waiting a good majority of the time just for someone to be in place to make a decision. And so I can say from that experience, it just slowed a lot of things down tremendously until other pieces were able to get into place. And even when you have, you know, career employees that are out there and around, that's one thing. But then you have other folks that once you get the appointees and all of those stuff in, it's still, you have to, you know, get used to their style. What are their asks? What are their backgrounds? It's a lot of preparation that goes into that, particularly from a policy perspective. But from a day-to-day standpoint, you know, with EPA, we have statutory authority and laws that we have to follow, regardless of who's in the White House. And we have laws and statutes that have to be implemented, regardless of who's in the White House. So for us, from a day-to-day standpoint, you still have those activities that are ongoing because they have to stay ongoing. What people, I guess, have a tendency to hear more sensationalized viewpoints are bigger policy pieces, or some of our bigger regulations that are either in development or have maybe previously been signed, that, you know, that there would be so much focus on. And I can say EPA definitely went through that initially on, and we continue to go through it off and on, and just depending on which office and which category. Air and water always seem to be hot topics, so you can pretty much count that both the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act activities really push and rue today, but also take up the majority of policy arguments and policy development as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I know you mentioned something about the personalities, and I got to think it's kind of like getting to know your professor at the beginning of the semester and trying to understand like their style and how they like their answers, their questions to be answered. And, you know, you kind of tweak your papers to, you know, oh, they really like it when someone mentions their favorite author. I would imagine it's somewhat similar, that same political savvy. But one thing that, Shanika, you also touched on was like the whole idea of a lot of the work that I'm guessing you all have done or are doing is rooted in statutory regulations. That is law that an agency has to fulfill and carry out. And I think this one question from Jeffrey says, some people who have worked in government talk about frustration with the bureaucracy. Has that been your experience? And to that end, like, you know, how much of this bureaucracy is because of the laws that you are charged with carrying out on behalf of the American people?
It's like ambassadors unmuted.
I know.
You know, foreign policy is much less subject to laws. It is much more tied to policies from the administration. There are certain laws that we'd like to hang on to, certain international treaties that we'd like to preserve from administration to administration. That's not so much a problem of a bureaucracy or a deep state for that matter. It is some sort of continuity in foreign policy. I think, for example, one of the best continuous programs we have had, supported by every administration throughout its history, is PEPFAR, President's Initiative for Fighting HIV/AIDS worldwide. And the PEPFAR program has been funded by Republican and Democratic administrations since its founding. It has been expertly managed by USAID and CDC. And while it is a bureaucratic process, of course, there's always a bureaucratic process. There's always some bureaucratic infighting on how to execute whenever there are funds available. People like to grow their programs and like to manage programs. Nevertheless, I think that was one of the things I enjoyed as chief of mission, was more or less coordinating between several government agencies to implement health programs, PEPFAR especially. So everything's a bureaucracy. If you go to work at Microsoft or you go to work at Amazon, you're going to find a bureaucracy.
Georgetown too.
Right. I mean, it's relatively inevitable. Any big machine, any big group of humans becomes a bureaucracy. And the one thing I would add, as I hopefully pitch to all of you to join the rebuilding of the State Department and the Foreign Service, is that it's been pretty much understood by many observers. Most recently, the U.S. Naval War College has referred to the embassy country team as the finest example of whole of government approach to problem solving. Because all of the government agencies in the embassy, and there could be as many as 50 different U.S. government agencies represented, they all report, because of the Constitution, by the Constitution, they all report to the chief of mission, to the ambassador. And the ambassador has powers extraordinary and plenipotentiary. And therefore, all executive branch personnel in country are responsive to the ambassador. And that way, the ambassador can bring all of these people together, all these agency heads together, and help coordinate their policies and coordinate their activities to execute a policy to promote the peace and prosperity of the American people. And the fun part of working within that bureaucracy is you get a lot of free range of action, you get a lot of initiative. There's a lot of coordination back to Washington that is required in order to get the resources to do your job. But at the end of the day, you actually do have a lever to move the planet. And if, as we do hope, when you graduate from Georgetown, you do have a very deep feeling that you are here to make the world a better place, then this is a lever where you can do good.
So one piece I would add to that, the question of the bureaucracy. When you come from private industry into the government, it's just slower, period. Like that's probably the number one thing most people notice. Oh my God, why do these things take so slow? Like I could write this memo in a day and we could send it out in a day, and that same process takes like 3 days to do. But what you learn is that, there's different chains of command, just like anything else, and anywhere else. And, when we're creating documents or whatever it may be for the public good, a lot of those pieces, once they're published, are FOIAble, right? So like we can get a FOIA, you can say, I want such and such document from such and such day. And one of the reasons why we call it bureaucracy, but things take so long, is because we ensure or try to our best of our ability to ensure that those documents or pieces or projects or whatever it may be are, to the best that they can be before they're released. So that's one reason why it takes so long. The other piece is that, I found throughout my time that it ebbs and flows. Everything ebbs and flows. Sometimes you have times that are super crazy busy. I've had the opportunity to be on a regulation development team and lead the development of a regulation. And you're like, gasping for air sometimes to say, oh, can we get a break? Can the bureaucracy kick in right now? Mainly because you have to have wait times. It has to go to a different office. You all may have heard of the Office of Management and Budget a number of times, especially around this time where all of the president's budget is moving forward, and then you're going to see the Senate committees and the House committees start meeting on budgets. And those times you hope for, because it actually gives you a break to catch up on other things, but also start preparing the other pieces. So I say that to say not everything in the bureaucracy moves at a painstaking pace. Some things do, but you usually have, a lot of projects running in parallel, or different initiatives that are running in parallel that kind of take up that slack space. That's what I've learned from at least being in here, being in the machine for a minute.
Yeah, thank you. Heather or Doug, any thoughts on the bureaucracy?
For me, I've come to definitely, just what Shanika said. I've come to appreciate a little bit of the ability to have things cleared, because, for example, and when I say things, I mean documents in particular, because you have to think that you're not privy to a lot of information that some of your higher ups have, and you only know the information based on the working the working level or the mid-level, but they're in meetings and in conversations that you're not aware of. And when they have the ability to clear a document or to say this document is okay, then they also inject some of that political some of that politicalness that you may not have just from the working level. So I've come to appreciate the checks and balances that come with the bureaucracy.
Yeah, there has to be checks. There has to be multiple checkpoints, just like you want your medicine to be tested for years before it's released. This isn't Microsoft, where I work, by the way, also a bureaucracy, to the ambassador's point, where if you release a code, if you rush a code out to the customers, a platform, it doesn't work, it crashes, you can patch it with some, you can issue some patches. Usually no one dies. I mean, USAID, could develop a policy, or State Department could issue a policy that could have national security ramifications. You can't just rush those things out the door. They have to go through multiple levels. They have to be analyzed. They have to be debated. All of those things take time. These are good things to have. To rush them would be reckless. So I don't see the word bureaucracy as a bad thing. Is it not fun at times? Sure. But at the same time, it's essential. And to be a bureaucrat in Washington, you can have a fine career if you enjoy it. I know many of them. They're quite good at it.
Thank you. And I would say the same thing. I see it from the hiring perspective, which is what I've worked in for my whole career, is understanding federal human capital. Like, the reason it takes so long for all of you who are trying to apply for government internships and jobs is it's really designed to try and ensure that the best candidate it gets in. So it's designed to, with a lot of other jobs, you can sometimes get ahead based on who you know or who your parents know and what school you went to. And the federal government application is meant to try and get rid of some of these things that, can hold back certain segments of the population, whether you're a first-gen college student or you're from, maybe a part of the country that you might not normally know as much about federal agencies as, say, someone who grew up in like the general DC area. It's meant to ensure diversity and inclusion and equity, but yeah, there's a lot of steps that then have to go through, both on the part of the applicant and the people who are doing the hiring. But the intent of these laws is a good one. There's other issues with federal hiring, that's for another time. I did want to get to another two questions. I'm kind of from Paula and Iman, and for our students who are maybe unsure about pursuing a federal career, what are some of the things they should be doing? And in particular, I have a question about, does someone who, say, has a more diverse set of backgrounds, such as like arts or media, like, can they be successful in some of your organizations, you know, whether it's the Foreign Service or going into the EPA, if say I don't have that biology, chemistry background, you know, how can someone who's starting out in their career maybe start to position themselves successfully, even if they, you know, maybe lack the subject matter expertise for a given agency?
Beth, I'm glad you said art or music. Public diplomacy cone officers specialize in cultural exchanges. They manage the Jazz Ambassadors Program that takes American jazz musicians and travels them around the world. They support the travel and performances and master's classes of the Alvin Ailey dance troupe around the world, using culture and the arts as a means of building cross-cultural communication. When you talk about what skills do you need to bring to the Foreign Service, communication is the most important, and I'm really, whatever your background is fine. We often say, for example, that Peace Corps volunteers who do their 2 years living and working in a foreign culture, that's like getting a master's degree in cross-cultural communication right there, and we recruit heavily from the Peace Corps. So, you know, you do have to pass the written exam, which demonstrates kind of a well-rounded understanding. They've often said, even with the changes that have come with the written exam, the best preparation for the written exam is to read a major newspaper cover to cover for a year, every day, and not just international affairs. Read the business section, read the national news, read the style section, read the opinion pieces to understand people and how they communicate and associate, whether it's through money and business or the arts or entertainment. How do people relate to each other? And what do they argue about, and what's important to them, and what are their values? How do you determine what is another person's value system, what is their calculus, and how do you communicate with them and try to find middle ground with them? That's the greatest skill to bring to the State Department, to the Foreign Service. And you could be a dance major for all that matters.
Yeah.
I think the key oh, sorry, it's raining over here and it's just lightning, but I'm in Atlanta. I remember I'm in Atlanta. Yeah.
I was confused for a second.
But the key is to focus on transferable skills. And I know that the Georgetown Career Center has been big on thinking about transferable skills. So from whatever background you come from, there are a core set of skills that you can transfer from what you've studied or what your interests are to what you're looking for in the federal sector, in the public sector. So, for example, one transferable skill that comes off the top of my head, besides what Ambassador just said about cross-cultural, interpersonal skills and communication skills, it's also excellent writing skills, and being able to write. I know that you guys are used to writing longer papers, but getting the skills to shorten the message, to make the message as potent as possible in as little space as possible is a very good skill to have. Writing after action notes and summary pages and summary notes for after a meeting, very, very important skill to have, to distill information into a bite-sized chunk that other people can then take, read, and get the information they need. And another transferable skill is program management and project management skills. I know that you guys have been a part of teams, a part of clubs, a part of activities regarding church or synagogue, or I know that you guys have had those kinds of experiences, and those are easily experiences that you can draw upon to say that you have project management skills, that you've taken the organization from A to Z in a specific amount of time. So I would encourage you guys to think about what are some of the transferable skills along communication, along project management, along writing, and think about how you can put that into your resume, which then gets screened when you're applying on USA Jobs to get to an actual person to look at your resume. So it's all about taking the experiences that you have, the interests that you have, and thinking about what are the skills that are required of the job and how can I transfer or express that I have those skills, even though I don't have the specific, the specifics of that job requirement.
Yeah, and I will say for students, I know sometimes project management, you're like, what is that? And you actually are doing it every semester when you know on day one that you're going to have a final paper that's worth 50% of your grade and it has to include A, B, C, D, and you use the semester to plan out and incorporate things. Like, that is exactly what project management is knowing you need to get to an endpoint in a certain amount of time. Exactly. And what are the steps you take to get there? Exactly. And that's just like one example.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. And, it's goal oriented. You have a goal, and what are the tasks to get to that goal? That's also, project management is also strategy. You have your big picture overarching goal. What are the specific, lines of effort that you need to do and to accomplish in order to meet that strategic goal? So that's an excellent point. Thank you.
Doug or Shanika, any thoughts?
I would definitely echo what Heather said, that I like to tell people that it takes all kinds for any agency within the federal government to run. We have the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, where all the budget people sit. Are you good with numbers? We have financial analysts, just like everyone else. We have, of course, congressional folks that their sole job is to do some of that intergovernmental work with either communicating with Congress or communicating to states and other regulators. I've worked with history majors, English majors. I think currently one of my big bosses, she was an English major in college, and she's a deputy assistant administrator. So definitely your background is more, and again, echoing what Heather said, is more about how you apply yourself at the end of the day. A little bit less about, I'm definitely, just a chemist and all I do is think chemistry all day long. We at EPA, because we're a science agency, we definitely have chemists, we definitely have biologists, but even though, my role, my title right now is supervisory biologist, that doesn't mean I'm working in the lab. That means I may be analyzing some data that's biology related, maybe, and seeing how that applies to overall policy or that applies to overall regulatory development. So don't think of it in the terms of, oh, it's hardcore science and then it applies to something in the laboratory. A lot of it, just requires, like, can you analyze material that's coming in? Can you take something that sounds super complicated and narrow it down to the nuts and bolts so that anyone would be able to understand it? And that's why I said it takes all kinds. Communications majors, math majors. One of my good friends did library science. She's actually a librarian for the State Department, and was flying around with the Secretary of State, our last Secretary of State, because they needed someone that understood this particular history or that history. And she had to pull together all that research and well, at the point it was Hillary Clinton, go with Hillary on the plane and divulge the information so that she would make sure she would understand to the region she's going to. So don't let just because what is on the placard of an agency or whatever the name of the agency fool you, or hold you back from applying. Because really, if you have the certain skill sets and you can think broadly and you can apply yourself, those are some of the main things that go into can you do this job? Not so much, oh, your degree was in quantum physics and now you want a communications position. Okay, but they're going to probably expect you to be able to communicate. So so take that in mind, but also just, definitely work on all your skills, make yourself an all-around person.
Doug, anything to add? No. Shanika, I loved how you said, like, okay, you might be a quantum physics major and now you need to do communication. I know one thing that we often say here is, like, one major doesn't equal your career. It can in some ways. But the other thing is, I have found in my own career journey that, once I got my first job, no matter how long it was for, I built on a set of skills, and that was often what would lead to the next thing. So yeah, maybe I might have, well, I didn't. I was an anthro major, so probably the farthest things from a quantum physics major, as you can imagine. But even if I started out as a quantum physics major, if my first job was in communications randomly, and I was able to build that skill set, then yeah, you can go forward to those types of jobs. So it's interesting how sometimes our own careers kind of have a life of their own. So, all right. So the next one, and I'm going to direct this, Doug, your way, because I know you're moving in some of these circles. But how often, this is from Brandon, how often do you have to schmooze with high-level leaders to get your policy ideas passed? And, what skills do you use to do that? We're talking both the big P politics and little p politics.
Right. Yeah. Schmoozing certainly can help if you're good at it. I frankly am more of a merit-based approach to getting things done. I try to make the case. I'm a critical thinker. I try to present the options whenever I meet with a senior leader. I always come with a couple solutions. I'm a dad to young kids, so the idea of going out, I did these things earlier in my career where I'd be out late at night having a cocktail and just getting to know people. I don't have the time to do that anymore, so I don't schmooze. I just make really good use of my critical thinking during the day, get my job done. But there are such things, like, I don't know how many people know about this. Maybe the ambassador does. There's such things within the agency, and I'm sure it's in other agencies, called like night notes, where you can literally like pass a note to like a senior official. Pretty, it's kind of like passing a note in class. I mean, it's a very unique, method of passing information, and that in itself gets attention. I personally don't feel the need to do that. But could you do that? Of course. A lot of people make their marks politically and career by face-to-face meetings, and I can imagine that those individuals are suffering right now. But when we're back to work and when things to return to some sense of normal, there's certainly a lot of people who, absolutely, have the coffee hours in the Ronald Reagan Building food court, early in the morning, and whether it's political or apolitical or contractors. I mean, that's an essential part of doing business in Washington. It's not, schmoozing gives off to me a negative connotation. I just call it networking. I think you have to constantly be meeting people, regardless of their. Hopefully, you're meeting with a diverse set of perspectives. I always like to meet the people who, frankly, have a unique, maybe even polar opposite perspective, such that when I do make my case, which is contrary to their perspective, I can understand it, hopefully articulate my point of view and why mine is a stronger argument. It's like you got to know your quote unquote opponent, so to speak. And so do I schmooze? I network. I do it well sometimes. I sometimes don't do it well. I only have so much time in the day to do it, but it's a critical component that, regardless of whether you're in Washington, D.C. or you're working in, Albuquerque, New Mexico, just to pick a random city that comes to mind, you'll always want to be networking. I mean, the fact that you're all, here we are June 30th, and you're all on this call, meeting me and Heather and Shanika and the ambassador is, you're schmoozing. Over.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you mentioned Albuquerque, New Mexico. One thing to realize too, as you all are spread out throughout the country, is I forget the exact statistic, but something like 70% of the federal government work happens outside of the Beltway. And so like Albuquerque is a major hub for like the Department of Energy and anything having to do with nuclear science. They have one of the major nuclear laboratories there. So like if that's something you're interested in, alternative energy, nuclear energy, things like that, like, yeah, you may end up in Albuquerque, or if you live near there are folks out there that are working in that area who are the federal government employees. So like, don't worry that like, oh, if you're not in DC now, or depending on what the next semester or the next year holds, you know, the federal government is much more spread out than you may realize, and globally, to the point of our panelists. But yeah, anybody else have any observations on political savvy and networking or schmoozing, as it were?
To your point, you know, I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, and a part of the commercial service is that we have 100 domestic offices, in addition to 70 offices in U.S. embassies and consulates overseas. So I'm based, my first tour is in the U.S. Export Assistance Center here in Atlanta. And, you know, I also want to put in the plug for, you know, a part of my job is wooing. So there are, you know, U.S. businesses who don't really know about exporting, and I'm constantly making the case to U.S. businesses as to why they should consider exporting as a part of their long-term strategy to diversify their portfolio, to continue to make their company grow. And so a large part of what I do is I call it wooing, is getting them to see why exporting is a viable option for them. And then when it comes to schmoozing, I also call it networking. And one of my mentors said that it is a part of your job to network, and that you should definitely dedicate a portion of your week to meeting someone, to meeting a new person, whether it's in your agency or in another agency that has a different piece of the pie that you're working in. So for example, Commerce is one agency that deals with economic development. But there's also the new Development Finance Corporation. And I recently reached out to someone who's also an SFS alum to talk about what that organization is. And that's a part of my job. And I like the way how my mentor said it. She said, you know, if you're not doing that, then you're not doing a substantial piece of your job. And so whether it's getting information, whether it's trying to woo, whether it's trying to make sure that other people know your point of view, that's all a part of your job. And yeah, I think schmooze has a negative connotation, but I guess it's that you can all lump that into schmoozing maybe, but it's definitely, I see it as a part of my job.
Shanika or the ambassador, any thoughts on this topic?
Well, Beth, I don't want to. I want to rule out the whole side, the negative connotation of schmoozing and lobbying and that sort of thing. That's not what we do. And in fact, internally, we have built in many processes to maintain a meritocracy in terms of assignments and promotions. So as you were pointing out with the written exam, it is designed to be as meritocratic as possible. And no amount of who you know or who knows you can help you to jump the queue, for example. And so internally, we have, there are promotion panels, complete with a public member from outside the business that reads the performance evaluations and compares them and determines, rank orders them for promotion. Assignment panels where all elements of the department have a representative on the panel that reviews each assignment and what officer will get assigned where. So, you know, schmoozing inside the building, we've done a lot to destroy the old boy networks and break up that influence. We have implemented using a little bit of technology, we've implemented electronic 360s that are blind, and the subject does not get to see their 360s. And the 360 reviews are a whole range of questions from superiors, subordinates, and peers. And that electronic record of what people think of that officer has completely replaced the old corridor reputation, which skews so many careers in a bad way back in the day. So schmoozing internally, I just want to eliminate that thing. We don't want to talk about that. But what my colleagues were talking about engaging people, particularly either internal to the U.S. government policy process, where you are engaging folks from other government agencies and trying to build consensus towards a policy. That's a major part of the job. And when you're overseas, engaging the host nation, whether it's their government representatives or their business representatives or the folks in journalism or in healthcare, when you're engaging them, you are trying to make contacts. You are trying to build bridges. You are trying to forge relationships. And if in fact you develop a specialty for a particular part of the world, you've learned the language, etc., over the course of your career, you will count foreigners as some of your best friends and professional contacts. And that's not schmoozing. That's doing your job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, so Doug, I see your note that you have to roll. So thank you for being on, especially since you're pulling double duty, working and being a dad. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining, and Beth has my information if anyone needs to get in touch with me. Thanks again.
Yep.
Thanks to my colleagues. Cheers.
Yep. Take care. All right. So we have just a few moments left. Are there any other questions that any students have for our panelists? Anything that you're burning to understand about the federal government or anything else? Feel free to put it in the text message. One thing I was curious if you all could take a moment to reflect on, was there anything about Georgetown's core values, being a person for and with others, or any of our values in that regard that you would say kind of led you down your path, or is that part of your reflection as you have gone through your career?
I can take a first stab. So I would say, one thing about Georgetown is that through panel discussions like this, and we're talking about networking, and using the alumni to understand and to have informational interviews and to just gain an understanding of what the possibilities are. I feel like Georgetown alum are definitely very good at paying it forward. And I mentioned that today when I wrote a LinkedIn post about this panel, is that, I know that if it wasn't for a lot of the Georgetown alum and the advice and what they, some of the information that they gave me, I wouldn't be a commercial officer. And I specifically think of, there was a panel on foreign service when I was in school, and I saw a commercial officer who we're now colleagues at this point, but I saw a commercial officer. I went to her, and it was through her and another Georgetown alum that I got my first internship with Commerce Department. But then that led me to Homeland Security, because I met a CBP, a Customs and Border Protection attaché, when I was abroad in South Africa. And it was just that the alumni network expanded with their networks definitely helped me navigate my career. And where one door closed, it was like there was always someone willing to talk with me and to expand my knowledge and my information of the possibilities. And that's one thing I wanted to say to you guys, that from the beginning of the call, if you're thinking about a foreign service career, state is not your only option. It's the well-known, the most known option, but it's not your only option. And there are a lot of domestic assignments that can still give you an international a portfolio, and then there's also other agencies that can give you the foreign service aspect besides State Department. So you know, I'm also here and, you know, willing and ready to talk to you guys more, whoever's interested in the foreign commercial service, since that's a little bit lesser known than State Department's foreign service. But I think it's that value of, like, we're gonna help the next, you know, the next set of students come up the ranks and know what's out there. I think that that's definitely a value that has personally helped me navigate my federal career.
Ambassador, thoughts about some of our Ignatian values and how that's guided you in your career?
Yes, and very important in that in the 1970s, Georgetown University was one of the first institutions of higher learning to push a concept called interdependence and an interdependent world. It was before anybody thought of the term globalization, but it was teaching the basic fundamentals that we are all interconnected and interdependent, and it pointed to the globalization that subsequently followed. Very forward thinking. Along with that, when they talked about interdependence and all of us being interconnected, they started talking about your individual responsibility to being a good citizen on the planet, and your active participation in making the world a better place for everyone, more fair, more equitable, you know, less war, less disease, more prosperity, more peace. So these are values that, at least during the 4 years when I was at Georgetown, gave me subconsciously, completely subconsciously, something that became very important to me later in my career, which was basically a moral compass. Because I can tell you, no matter what career we go into, you are going to be faced with some difficult choices. You will be faced with some hard and fast choices. And they will be clearly, they won't be too gray area, okay? They'll be right and wrong with consequences. And you will have to make choices. And the important thing in life, to lead a life that you can be proud of, to lead a life, you come into it with integrity, to leave it with integrity, you've got to have your moral compass on true north. And I know I'm talking a lot of aberrations and things like that, but I'm talking about in your office, there's an accusation of sexual harassment. Do you look the other way? Is it too much trouble? Cheating on a contract, kickbacks. You know, do you look the other way? So you have this. This is very, very important, is to maintain this moral compass. If we are going to build a better world, we've all got to get aligned and be pretty clear on what is right and what is wrong, and stand for it. And engage others, as Doug was saying, engage others with logical arguments to explain why the right is the right way to go. And that's that, I think, is a very, very important part, no matter what career you go into. And let me just leave that point and close by saying I've got the greatest respect for the Foreign Commercial Service and the Foreign Agricultural Service. These are two agencies that actually have Foreign Service officers in their agencies. Foreign Service officers, just like State Department Foreign Service officers, but specialized in commerce or agriculture. And there are many, many government agencies that have large international programs, and they send a lot of their people overseas to serve in U.S. embassies, and happy to have them. So no matter what career you pursue, just remember what somehow the good fathers at Georgetown were able to seep into your brain, and into your heart that we are here for a reason. We are here to make the world a better place. And you can make a contribution. Just keep your moral compass on true north.
Thanks.
So I would definitely echo the ambassador's words, but also Heather's words. You know, coming out of Georgetown, Georgetown itself is an institution that's ingrained in, of course, history, but also producing candidates and producing graduates that have that moral compass that you heard the ambassador talk about, that have the ability to apply their knowledge to change certain aspects of this world. That's why you have so many people that graduate from the school and go into policy, public policy. You have so many people that graduate and go into political sciences. I think one thing is that probably the underlying current that most people have in common is wanting to change something, some aspect of the world, or some aspect of the local government, or just Georgetown just being placed where it is within the heart of the federal government of all of the US is hard not to, one, have policy somewhere, way, shape, or form invade your day, not to have politics in some way, shape, or form kind of help meld and mold how you view yourself in this world, not just whatever label is just thrown upon you. When it comes to that honesty and being just a genuine person, I think those are things that hopefully you all in your lives here at Georgetown University, but throughout your schooling, that's one of the things that you've learned too, of, you know, how do I present myself as a genuine person that caring one to a certain degree wants to create change for someone else, that wants to create change for my environment, the environment, globally, or domestically. And taking those ideals and putting them to use. You know, sometimes we and this is of course a career forum, and our minds jump to what's the giant creative good that I can do, and how can I hit the, you know, exact all impact on all these pieces. And there's several different things that you can do with that, but what people tend to forget are the little things and the pieces of the world that you have control over now that you can make better for yourself, or make better for people that are around you. Just like the ambassador said, you see something that is not right going down. Do you stand there or do you walk away? Do you say something? Do you stand up for people that are unlike yourself? Because that's the thing that was good and good natured and good hearted to do. Or do you say, they can fend for themselves, right? I think that's also a stream that you see run through folks, and part of that wanting to change for the better. That change can be big, that change can be small, but regardless, you have control over that. And you know, I guess the other piece that I'll give, or I'll leave with, one of the things is, you know, people look at this job and I need this job and I only need this piece, and that's part of the rat race, and how do I get to the top the fastest? And, you know, sometimes that's what it gets ingrained in us all the way from high school, right? Like, how do I get to the top of the class? How do I be to the top position in this company? And you can't skip over the little pieces and the little things. Character, the type of person you are, that holds so much more weight sometimes, and it gets so overlooked. And it's refreshing. I can definitely speak for myself when you run into people that are a good character, that do, you know, wholeheartedly believe in that change and believe in the right way of getting there. Because you don't find that everywhere. And, you know, even though one of the goals may be the race to the top as quickly as possible. Sometimes just slow down and take in the learnings and the teachings that you're getting on a daily basis. Finding a mentor, reaching out to someone that has a job that you want or you see yourself in or that speaks to you, and just having a conversation. Because part of that networking, the whole underlying piece of networking is being able to communicate with people. And if you can communicate effectively and say, oh, I'm really interested, how did you get here? What, do you have tips? Just like you guys are on this call today, but doing that with other people and building connections, that's part of it. And hopefully your time at Georgetown has at least ingrained that part in you as well.
Thank you. You all three shared some real words of wisdom there at the end. So thank you. And kind of to your last point, Shanika, is that, students, even though this career pathway series is coming to an end for the summer, all of our, all these conversations will be online on video format so that you can review them. And also all of our panelists are open to being contacted. So after this, probably tomorrow, I'll be sending out an email with their contact information or links to their Hoya Gateway profiles, where you can feel free to reach out and chat with them. And that's really a benefit is the network that you have here between the wonderful alumni and your professors and folks who are plugged into this world. So the summertime can be a really great chance for you to take advantage and do that. And we're also here to help you on your journey at the Career Center. So we are still around during the summer virtually for appointments and one-on-ones and drop-ins. So I did want to make sure that you all are aware of that. But thank you again to our panelists, Ambassador Hosa, Shanika, Heather. Thank you very much for everything that you've done for our country and also for our alums. And we look forward to staying in touch. So
thank you. Thanks for putting this on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you guys.
Yes, thank you very much. And
Bye.
yes, have a great day.
Yep.
Take care,
Take care
everybody.
all. Bye-bye.